Halloween is my second favorite holiday after Christmas. Everything just feels different. Everyone decided that on the 31st of October, we all worship Satan and eat candy. How can you top that? So I decided that I'm gonna spice things up this year with a Halloween special. That's right, guys. I will finally be talking about the one, the only, the vile, the horrific, the macabre, the loathsome Game of the Year 2015, the motherfucking Witcher 3. Wait a minute, Witcher 3? What's so scary about Witcher 3? What does that have to do with Halloween? Well, obviously, it has witch in the title. Idiot. The Witcher 3 is an action RPG, action game with RPG elements, depending on your gender identity, I guess, that was made in 2015 and is considered one of the greatest games ever made by a surprising number of people. CD Projekt Red is a widely respected game developer, and their upcoming game, Cyberpunk 2077, has been highly anticipated since it was announced 87 years ago, even though it keeps getting delayed over and over again. Can you believe that? All the way back to December 10th. Guess they want to make sure it's good. The Witcher 3 has been one of those games that I always felt that I needed to beat. It felt like unfinished business to me. 5 years ago, I watched live as this was awarded the prestigious Game of the Year award. Other nominees included Super Mario Maker, Fallout 4, Bloodborne, and Metal Gear Solid 5. Now that was the part that messed me up. Now obviously, this is all super subjective, and my opinion is just my opinion, but MGS5, while it doesn't have a great story, it didn't have the absolute top of the line best graphics, it didn't matter, because the gameplay was so fine-tuned and so polished and so open, that it fundamentally changed the way I think about open world games and even just games in general. Now, my audience is very Nintendo-centric, so I'm gonna try and put this into perspective for you guys. You know Breath of the Wild with its super open gameplay that allows you to approach every task in any way you can think of? That's what MGS5 was, but 2 years earlier. I mean, look at this. You can fight a sniper by calling in supply drops to drop boxes on her head. Now that's what I call thinking outside the box. I won't say it was the first to allow such inventiveness and creativity, but it's such a rare thing that I wish more AAA games would adopt, and they pulled it off so well that I believe it should be remembered as a generation-defining title. And I definitely think it should have won Game of the Year, but that's just me. By comparison, when I first played Witcher 3, I was really put off by how clunky and unsatisfying and frankly unpolished it felt, and I just couldn't click with the gameplay. I guess what messed with my head more than anything was the fact that Metal Gear always got shit for having too much cutscenes and not enough gameplay, so MGS5 was made to be 95% gameplay. But then Witcher 3 comes in, which is another game that constantly interrupts the action with cutscenes and dialogue, and wins Game of the Year. Like, what do you people want? Do you even know? Okay, well, obviously I'm being deliberately obtuse here. It's much more complicated than that. I think most people who played this game were captivated by the story and atmosphere, and I will admit, even 5 years on, this game looks very good and the story is interesting. Now, I haven't played the previous games, but I'm 90% sure most people haven't played them either, so I don't feel too bad about that. You play as a hot Witcher boy named Geralt, who is a shiny, sexy man with bitcher powers, and a hot wife who gives him crabs. I can't believe I wrote that. He is on a quest to save his surrogate daughter from the Wild Hunt, so he travels to White Orchard to find his girlfriend, except is she your girlfriend? That's up to you. Find out in the next exciting chapter of Witcher 3. But all the while, there's a bunch of political crap going on because of a war or something. I don't know, but everyone's racist against witchers and mages and whatnot, so it's your job to mash light attack and one-hit every drunken man in the pub. The story is pretty engaging, even without the additional context of the previous games. In fact, that almost makes it better. Geralt's body tells an entire backstory just through all the damage that he's had to endure. There are all kinds of relationships that give you just enough information to piece together their significance, and this is also one of those games that has multiple endings depending on how you navigate the story. This is an incredibly beautiful video game. Riding off into the sunset always turns the game into a painting for a brief moment of time. The audio is incredible. You have those slow, sad songs for when you're wandering a desolate town full of hardship and poverty. You got those upbeat high adventure songs for when you're stabbing things. It definitely has the atmosphere down to a T. But that's all anyone ever talks about, the story and atmosphere. And while I enjoy that stuff, I also enjoy fun video games. The way I see it, there are 3 major points that a AAA game should aim to master. Firstly, and most importantly, is the gameplay. A game's mechanics need to be polished and or intricate and engaging, preferably both. Doom Eternal is one of those games that's super fine-tuned to the point that no matter how many times I died, I could never blame the controls or the mechanics. I could only blame myself and push myself to get better. And because the simple act of dashing around and shooting is so fun and addicting, I can't put it down even after I've completed the game. On the other hand, games like MGS5 again have very intricate and nuanced mechanics with several applications that an outside-the-box thinker would be able to take advantage of. If you nail this part of development well enough, you can get a ton of leeway on the next two parts, which brings us to the second point. The atmosphere. This covers graphics, aesthetic, and sound. Remember, when you play a game, you could be playing for several hours at a time, so in order to keep you captivated by the world of the game, you're also going to want to hit this point pretty well. Even Majora's Mask with its old-ass N64 graphics, the style and sound really put me in the world of Termina. That creepy cave ambience, that weird naked dude who just dances on a tree all night whistling that creepy tune. This is Termina to a capital, bold, impact font T. Because Termina is a twisted, creepy, backwards perversion of the world that you thought you knew. Kinda like Quebec. And finally, there is the narrative. This encapsulates the plot, story, dialogue, and characters. In the old days, narrative in video games was more of an afterthought, just a means of giving context to the gameplay. But now that games have become more and more ambitious with storytelling and drama and striving for cinematic qualities, there has been a greater focus on nailing this. So there it is. In order from most to least important, there's gameplay, then atmosphere, then narrative. As I said, you can get away with a bare bones narrative and to a lesser extent the atmosphere as long as the gameplay kicks ass. If the main antagonist of Star Fox 64 was, I don't know, a fucking box of saltines holding a crunch bar, it would definitely be stupid, but I'd probably still play it because it's just fun to play. And even atmosphere. A lot of old games still have great atmosphere. But even when they show their age, the gameplay can still save the day. But while great gameplay can compensate a crappy narrative and atmosphere, I'm seeing a lot of games these days that try to have it the other way around, where the narrative and atmosphere try to compensate shallow gameplay. Games like Last of Us, Red Dead Redemption 2, Death Stranding, and yes, The Witcher 3. The thing about Witcher 3 is that I like to play shooting games, and Witcher 3 is not. Possibly Witcher 3's biggest issue is that there is so much non-gameplay in this game, especially during the main campaign. There are so many dumbass missions that make you follow some guy as he keeps stopping in his tracks to scratch his ass or whatever, or navigating a dialogue tree that feels like it goes on forever, and usually ends with Geralt saying some shit like, "Fine, I'll get your tomatoes," or whatever. Or riding the broken-ass horse who can't even go down a tiny little drop-off or go over this bridge because there's a horse-proof force field on it, or just do anything that will allow me to actually survive. The thing is, the dialogue trees are important to the story, and they represent one of the big challenges that all narrative-driven AAA video games face, trying to balance the gameplay with the story to ensure that neither impedes on the other. But these dialogue trees are the way most of the story is conveyed, so you have to go through them to fully understand the plot, but sometimes they just fucking drag on and on and on. Then there's Gwent. Everyone and their mom is always down to play Gwent. The funny thing is, Gwent is probably one of the more deep and thoughtful elements of Witcher from a purely gameplay perspective. It's hilarious that they developed a whole-ass Magic the Gathering type card game for this game, so I guess it makes sense that everyone plays it, at least from a design point of view. I feel like 10% of the development resources for this game were spent on Gwent. I think my favorite part of Witcher 3 is when I killed these level 4 drowners and liberated the area. Then a cutscene happened showing all the nice villagers returning to the town, but wait a minute. Those aren't nice villagers, they're a bunch of level 18 bad guys who all hate my fucking guts. Ooh, and they can just kill me in 2 hits, wow. Yeah, you're welcome for liberating the town. Ooh, look, a new treasure side quest. Ooh, look, a level 18 grave bitch. Ooh, and now Geralt decides that he's going to get on the horse as slowly as humanly possible, and I can't cancel the animation to run away and I get killed in 1 hit. Fun game. Wait a second. Did Roach just fucking kick me in the face? That's perfect. Give this the Game of the Year trophy. I was very fortunate that the game autosaved just before this happened, but since wonky things like this can apparently just happen, I started getting into the habit of manually saving every time I did something substantial in case it happened again. Remember, it takes 18 years to make any progress in this game, and I'm not about to lose that shit. The pacing of Witcher can be very exhausting. I remember I was starting to get kind of invested into the story and leveling up and building my Geralt to maximum bitcher levels, but then they just stopped the entire thing so I could play as Ciri and do a little escort slash tailing slash trailing slash following some asshole mission with a little British girl and mash light attack to kill a bunch of wolves. The gameplay in these Ciri sections is so brain dead it might as well be a cutscene. It's the same as Geralt, except you don't level up and you can't collect stuff, but you have this broken whoosh move that makes you so overpowered that it's just a baby mode version of the regular game. I especially loved this part where I had to climb to the top of the tower to help the Baron, so I climbed up here, which seemed like the most intuitive thing to do, but then there was no way up from there, so I had to carefully climb down, which is hard to do in this game because of how clunky the controls are, especially since I still don't have a sense of the fall damage in this game. Turns out, I just have to walk over to these rocks and then it plays a cutscene. So, I kill this thing, it takes the Baron up in a cutscene, now I have to walk to a specific spot near the bottom of the tower, and then it plays another cutscene of me being at the top of the tower. That entire thing could have just been a cutscene. In fact, a good chunk of the things in the missions of this game could be relegated to a cutscene. There's so much unnecessary padding with little sequences where you follow somebody like 150 feet away and nothing happens the whole time. It's not even like a stealth thing like Assassin's Creed where you're trailing behind someone undetected. You're just walking with somebody. And there are some missions that just do a fade out to show you that you moved, so it's not like they don't know they can do this. Like, this game already has a magnum long runtime. We don't need these extra sequences in between missions. Unfortunately, most of the quests are like this and just send you running all over these massive worlds back and forth between 7 different assholes just to beat one quest. I know that's kind of an RPG thing, but it feels fucking neurotic around the 20-hour mark, and as the game stretches into the 50s and 60s, I feel like my mind is completely disintegrating. The way I feel about the pacing in this game is the way people describe Donkey Kong 64, except this game lasts 100 hours. Back to Geralt Land. Once there was this part where I had to get this guy's goat. Now, the goat follows me wherever I go until he gets stuck on the geometry. Then a bear shows up, which means he can no longer move at all, which makes perfect sense, you know, because that's the problem with goats. So now I have to fight the bear. As you will notice from my encounter with the bear, the enemy AI is very, very good. Notice how the bear never goes anywhere near me, even though I'm standing in plain sight and shooting him with infinity crossbow bolts. Check out these guys who are making the conscious decision not to run up to me and stab me while I'm aiming the crossbow. Absolute Machiavellian chess master level tacticians right here. Like Alfred von Schlieffen. This is one of those games that has a bunch of different systems for combat. You have the sword fighting and the magic and this crossbow that takes 7 light years to aim and sometimes doesn't aim at all. So unless you're far enough away that enemies get stupid brain and don't approach you, don't use it. Nothing ever seems as effective as spot dodging and mashing light attack while shoving a billion dumplings in your mouth to get your health back. That is, unless you're fighting someone twice your level. But even then, you can usually still just brute force your way a lot of the time. Oh shit, the Wild Hunt is storming the fortress, now I'm really gonna have to mash light attack. Now maybe this is just how I play these games. Honestly though, I spec'd all my skill points into the light attack and it was hella easy. And this isn't like the easy mode either, this is one of the hardest difficulties. Not the hardest, you know, but the second hardest, I think. Maybe there's an ultimate bitcher mode in the New Game Plus. Don't know, don't care. That being said, there were a few times in this game where I bit off more than I could chew and died. This is when I learned of one of Witcher 3's greatest sins. That is the load time. Can I ask you something? Why does Red Dead Redemption 2 for the shitty 2013-ass PS4 load faster than Witcher 3 on my PC whose hardware wasn't even out yet when this game was released? This load time gets really annoying in parts like this where you had to cross a path of poisonous vapor to get to a portal with no really clear safe way to go. I don't know if this is a bitchy complaint, but I feel like it takes way too long to level up in this game. Well, at least in the beginning. It gets a lot better later, but as an early example, I started a mission where you have to kill the Griffin near the beginning, but it was a level 3 mission, and I was level 2. So I decided that maybe I should see about leveling up again before tackling it. I had to do literally every single other mission on the map at the time and destroy every single ghoul nest before I could just barely get to level 3. Maybe this is normal for these types of games, I wouldn't know because I only play shooting games, and Witcher 3 is not. You can side quest for hours and barely get anywhere because they barely give you a dickle of experience until you get to one mission that's just like, wow, you found a ghost, 100 XP. Wow, you found another one, 100 XP. Wow, you found an... So naturally the game has infinity side quests, and that's one of the big things about Witcher 3, its bigness. Giant maps, 17 billion different side quests on each map, 87 hours of cutscenes and dialogue trees, a bunch of hidden shit everywhere, and don't get me wrong, scratching things off the map can be pretty addicting, but eventually it all boils down to very basic stuff. 20% of the game is hoarding plants and herbs to sell to the merchant for food, 20% dodging and mashing light attack, 30% is cutscenes and dialogue trees, and the other 30% is just traveling. Witcher 3 is a repetitive game, but, I want to qualify that statement. You see, every single video game can be described as repetitive. Metal Gear Solid 5 is repetitive. You run around, shoot, take down enemies, put them up on balloons, drive tanks, and for the rest of the game you're going to be doing that. This is repetitive to be sure, but what separates this from something like Witcher is that it constantly pushes your knowledge of the mechanics to new levels by introducing new challenges and obstacles, and you start to think of new applications for the mechanics and tools to achieve your goals. In terms of Witcher 3, the strategy for everything is a flowchart. If you're high enough level, roll around and mash light attack. If you're underleveled, get your sweet Witcher ass out of there and do a billion more side quests and then come back. As you've probably figured out by now, I have a bit of a distaste for RPGs at a fundamental level, and while I realize a lot of people hate hearing that, I want you to know that I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm just hoping you sort of understand my point of view. That being said, Witcher 3 is getting some leeway since it's an action RPG / action game with RPG elements, meaning that I do find it more engaging than most traditional RPGs. I've always been a fan of the I'm not like the other girls type RPGs, which is probably the most popular unpopular opinion of all time, and Witcher kind of fits that category just by virtue of being an action game that heavily employs RPG elements. I guess my biggest beef with RPGs is that they are almost always built the way I mentioned earlier, with the story and atmosphere at the forefront and the gameplay as secondary. But that's the thing. In order to tell the big, enormous, epic story you want to tell in an RPG, you're inevitably going to be taking the gameplay and stretching it way out, and if your gameplay isn't really that engaging or interesting, it's gonna wear out quickly. Witcher 3 is one of those games where they have a specific way they want you to do everything, or sometimes a set of predetermined plans to achieve the same thing, which isn't objectively bad for the most part. It's mildly frustrating when you get so far on a mission only to realize you need to craft a bomb that you don't have the right ingredients for, but that's life. I guess my issue is that I can't help comparing it to MGS5 simply because so many people believe this deserved the Game of the Year award, even though the game isn't really doing anything new or groundbreaking in the way that MGS5 managed to. At the same time, Witcher 3 is also subject to all manner of general jankiness and sloppiness. The simple act of walking and riding your horse can be a pain in the ass sometimes. Can I ask a question? Why are the horse controls in this 2015 game worse than the horse controls in fucking Ocarina of Time for the N64 that came out 22 years ago? One thing that pisses me off is when you try to run away from a fight, but for some reason when he runs out of stamina, or sometimes for no reason at all, Geralt keeps entering his combat stance automatically, turning to face the enemy whenever they get too close to him, stopping dead at his tracks, and walking slow as shit. Like 5 times slower than your basic walk speed. This is the exact opposite of what any reasonable player would be trying to do when they run into a bunch of enemies twice their level. Why would they do this? My favorite part was when he did this in the middle of a fight with owl ghouls and I tried to get him to stop doing it, so he leapt off a cliff in a direction I wasn't pushing, and he died. Genius. The pacing of Witcher accelerates very slowly. The first 15 hours is a long slog. You guys know that meme about Death Stranding where they're all like, don't worry guys, it gets good after the first 82 hours. Yeah, well, that's what Witcher is like. Money. In order to do anything in Witcher 3, you need money. I've seen people complain that it takes too long to accumulate money in this game, but I learned a trick early on. The side quests and the loot you get from dead enemies barely give you a dickle of cash, so what you want to do is you want to run around hoarding herbs whenever you're free roaming so you can sell them in bulk for $1 a piece to some merchant. Do this whenever you free roam and you will have infinite money. You could all tab into a Chrome window and pull up Cookie Clicker for 15 hours and it would pretty much have the same depth. In fact, that could almost describe the entire game. What about the crafting? This really sucks in the beginning. You go to the guy to craft some armor, but oop, you need silk. Oop, you don't have enough material to craft the silk. Oop, you can't afford material to craft the silk. Now you have to collect 1,000,000,000 herbs and sell them to this guy so you can afford the materials to craft the silk. Then buy the materials to craft the silk. Then craft the silk. Now you have enough materials to craft the armor, but you don't have enough fucking money to pay the guy to craft the armor. So now you gotta go grab some more herbs, sell the herbs, buy the thing, equip the thing, and be prepared to do all that shit over again in 2 hours when all your equipment becomes obsolete. Fuck this game. This game's a piece of shit. Why are we playing it? Why did it win Game of the Year? Jeff Keighley, what the hell is you doing? What the hell am I doing? Look, none of us are gonna live forever, and the way the world is, I could be dead by Christmas, and nobody in their right mind wants to die doing this. But nobody cares about that. People care about the story and atmosphere. As I mentioned earlier, the story and presentation of Witcher 3 is still spectacular 5 years running. The graphics and aesthetic are beautiful, it's realistic without being washed out and gross, and there are a lot of moments where the sun peeks over the horizon and creates these beautiful painting-like images. The music and voice acting are all great. Every time Geralt opens his mouth, it's like he's making sweet Witcher love to your ear holes. I think the main goal of Witcher 3 is to make you feel like you're on a grand, epic, high fantasy adventure like most RPGs. And there certainly is enough lore and triumphant music and a large enough scope to achieve that. There are a shitload of missions with fleshed out characters that fit the world well, and it has more than enough ridiculous over-the-top violence and sex and nudity to remind you of a simpler time when Game of Thrones was actually a somewhat good show. I think it was fate really that Witcher would eventually become a Netflix series. But the game itself just exhausts me. The gameplay boils down to trailing missions, mashing light attack, dialogue trees, looting everything, selling it for piss baby money, and dialogue trees, and following missions, and light attack, and walking, and cookie clicker, and doing that for 100 hours until the game is done. I honestly would probably never have finished the game if I didn't want to review it. The gameplay loop is just so simplistic and unengaging that I could feel my brain baking itself. But the exhaustingly long stretches of dialogue and cutscenes tricks you into thinking that any amount of actual gameplay is fun, and it is cool at first because sometimes when you kill someone it plays this badass animation where Geralt whacks some dude's head off or cuts his whole body in half, but that kinda loses its punch when you've seen it all. And you can't even have sex with the male prostitutes. What a shit game. I get that Geralt is canonically the most heterosexual man in the history of existence, but come on, he's a bitcher. He's already an enormous slut who's had sex with every woman that will ever exist. Imagine what a champ he'd be if he had sex with every guy too. What about Dandelion, man? Come on. Okay, not really, but in all seriousness, to me, The Witcher 3 serves as a prime case study of how gamers are willing to ignore shallow and unpolished gameplay as long as the presentation is great, and there's an avalanche of stuff inside of it. It's not even a horrible game, there are genuinely cool aspects to it. The world is big and beautiful enough for any video game, there are a ton of awesome set pieces, and the sheer quantity of quests and shit is crazy. But it doesn't do anything really interesting with the gameplay. You learn the full depth of the mechanics in the first hour, and then for the rest of the game it never pushes that any further and reduces everything to a matter of numbers and levels. On the other hand, shallow gameplay isn't inherently bad as long as the game's pacing is efficient and doesn't drag on too long, but unfortunately, this game does. In summation, Witcher 3 is a deeply frustrating video game to me, and seeing the avalanche of thunderous applause and endless praise this game continues to receive to this day makes me feel, yet again, like I'm fighting a battle all on my own. And it's a prime example of the direction AAA games are taking, where they can compensate the gameplay with the story and atmosphere. And if you want to call me a hipster douche or a contrarian dickhead, that's fine, but please understand that I don't gain anything from having unpopular opinions. Sometimes I really do wish my natural, honest-to-God, true-to-myself opinions all aligned with the popular one, but I don't want to lose my individuality. And then again, that's what Halloween is all about, being different, and weird, and scary. And nothing is scarier than unpopular opinions.